All right, I'm excited to talk to our guest today because, Nick, we need somebody that works inside the chambers of Congress to help us make sense of everything that's happening on the Hill. No one better than Deputy Chief of Staff for Representative Adam Kinzinger, Maura Gillespie. Maura, Mike Leon, Nick Saveri, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Maura, I reached out to you and told you a little bit about what we do on this show, really informing and educating. We've had former government officials on this pod. We've had people that cover what it's like working in government. Before we get into all of that, I would love for you to share with us, as we've asked other folks that have come on the pod that work in the political sphere, how'd you get your start in DC? What made you want to work in public service and government?
So it's going to sound a little nerdy, but in high school, I did presidential classroom, and it's kind of like a mock Congress. So sort of how Model UN, it's a mock Congress, and knew I wanted to be in DC, went to Loyola, registered, to be in political science. And our first, freshman year professor encouraged us all to do internships. So being in Baltimore, you're not too far from DC. So I got started working on the House floor. I served as an internship in the summer of '09, and it was under then Republican leader John Boehner. So came back, did another internship in my senior year, and it was the fall of 2010 where the Republicans took back the House. So great time to be there. And as the Boehner team was moving over to the Speaker's office, I got a job. I applied to be staff assistant and got hired at the beginning of my senior year. So I started working as a staff assistant for the Speaker of the House, January 2011.
Building off of that, what you just mentioned about the party, something that has to be sort of explored is the idea of bipartisanship. You've been fortunate enough to be in a situation where in your span of time working in Congress, the spirit of bipartisanship seems to have taken some different twists and turns. I'm mincing words here. I'm trying to be polite, but the reality is, at least from an outsider's view, it seems far more polarized now than it has been previously. Is that a safe assessment? And just from your experience, what has been the spirit of bipartisanship look like? From where you started to where we are at this moment.
So I've been on the Hill now about 11 plus years, and it has changed dramatically, in my view, from where I sat. And I'm an anomaly on the Hill, I will say, as far as a staffer goes, because I stayed with my first boss for better part of 5+ years, and I've been with my current boss for 6, almost 7 years. And that is not the norm. Most Hill staffers go from one office and then they have an opportunity to grow. And so that's wonderful. But for me, serving with both Speaker Boehner and Congressman Kinzinger, two members who understood, in my view, what it meant to serve. And that is bipartisanship. That compromise is not a dirty word, nor should it be. And I think both Boehner and Kinzinger understood that. They got it. They ran for Congress for the right reasons. I'll just quickly say, with Speaker Boehner, members would come back to the Speaker's suite and go into his office, Democrats, Republicans. If they wanted to talk to him, his door was open. And it wasn't uncommon for us to see a Democrat walk back and want to talk to the Speaker. I don't know that ever happens now. I would guess not. I think that the bipartisanship on the Hill has been strained significantly. And I think January 6th and what happened and those who didn't vote to certify the election only worsened that divide with Democrats and Republicans.
I'm so glad you segue into that because, recently Representative McCarthy, there's been some tapes that have made the media circuit rounds about his comments, about former President Trump and the responsibility he bears for January 6th. Obviously, Representative Kinzinger is on, the January 6th committee. I know Representative McCarthy, Minority Leader McCarthy has made some comments about Adam serving on that committee. What do you make of the people within the party turning on Kevin McCarthy due to these tapes coming out? And then what do you make of the duality of the comments, right? Because publicly, he's over here, chastising Adam for joining this committee and saying that this is a sham. And then privately, he's actually saying what should be said, right? Which is what happened on January 6th was a travesty and a tragedy in this country. So what do you make of both?
My first reaction is that it's not surprising. It's disappointing, but it's not surprising that the duality of the comments, what's being said in public and what's being said in private, and even the fact that trying to walk it back and say that denying that he said it, right? That stuff doesn't surprise me. What I think the impact will be is that, and with Leader McCarthy talking about, making comments about Congressman Kinzinger serving on the committee, same with Congresswoman Liz Cheney. History will tell this story, and I know and I believe that Congressman Kinzinger and Cheney and those are all in the committee will be on the right side of history. I can't say the same for several in the party who voted not to certify the election, and for those who are lambasting Leader McCarthy for what he said in private, but because they're upset that he didn't double down in support of Trump from day one. That just speaks volumes, unfortunately, of the extremists that we have in the GOP. So it's not surprising, unfortunately.
Speaking of the extremists, in the party at the moment, a couple of weeks ago, we had on a reporter from the Los Angeles Times, Nolan McCaskill, and something he'd observed, which was interesting, was, the relationships that we're seeing with what as you mentioned a moment ago, with those on the extreme right, of the party, with those who, and I'll speak only for myself here, that seem more level-headed, that seem to have America's interest best at heart, more middle of the road. But it appears that sometimes when cameras are on, social media is involved, some members of the party tend to basically take on what could best be considered an extended personality. In your experience, is that assessment correct? Are you seeing more of a performative stance from those on the more extreme side of the party that doesn't gel with just as human beings when you're all seeing them in the halls of Congress?
I would agree with that. I think there are a lot of members who ran to be famous. They ran for power or a perceived sense of power, as opposed to running to serve the people that they claim to represent. I think that there's a very big difference. And again, kind of contrasting it with my time in the speaker's office to now, and what we're seeing with even just the last few years of people running solely to make a name for themselves. And I think that is just such a disservice, not only to the institution, but to the people who they're supposed to represent, who are getting a fame seeker instead of, a principled leader. And part of so the congressman's efforts on Country First, it's a movement. It's part of the mission is to take out the most toxic and partisan politicians and the extremists that are running and targeting them in the primary.
On that subject of what personalities we're seeing play out and why people are getting in, I appreciate you acknowledging that people may be seeking fame, almost equivalent to reality TV stardom. Is social media to blame for that, in the sense that it's become a new avenue for people to put their message out beyond television, radio, newspapers? But now you have a forum that's now almost 15, 16 years old that seems to be a new platform for more extreme voices. And is that watering down or just taking away the way messaging should look as it relates to, of all things, serving the people of the United States of America?
As a communications professional and as somebody who has studied history and was a political science major, I would say yes, it definitely has had an impact. There are positives to having that opportunity to talk to your constituents directly, quickly. But I would say on the larger scale, members of Congress were never supposed to be famous. They were never supposed to be, this much access or to their every thought, their every whim, what they had for breakfast, things like that weren't supposed to be shared as readily as they are, because they were, supposed to be elected officials that were representing their constituents, 700,000 of, whichever district, not, a talking head essentially. So I definitely think that social media and how quickly things have to go out. So I will say, as someone who used to, help craft press releases, I still do press releases, but do I think that everyone's reading every lovely letter I send out or every email I send out? Probably not. I'm realistic. They'd rather see it in a tweet. They can read it easily, retweet, share, move on. So yes, it has changed how we message, but on the other side of that, it's helped us and caused us to become more creative in how we reach our constituents. Because to me, Twitter is largely a certain crowd. I don't think everyone in the congressman's district is on Twitter. So I have to reach them other ways. Local radio is a great opportunity to talk to people. Yes, press releases that I know will get picked up by the local paper, we can reach them that way. But social media has been tough. And I think, to your point, causing people to run for office that maybe don't have the best of intentions.
Maura, I want to get into, obviously we all know Representative Kinzinger is retiring at the end of his term and not running for reelection. I wanted to ask you, do you feel like his retiring kind of sends a bad message that the good people in politics are leaving, and the further leaning folks in the extreme directions that don't have the best interest for the general public are able to kind of capitalize on that? Like, it's almost like the good guys are deciding to quit. So what say you about him retiring this at the end of this term, and what that says about either not staying to fight the fight, or is it more of like, we can do it in a different way through the Country First initiative that you guys are doing?
And I think that's exactly what it is. The congressman is in his 6th term. And so I think in a lot of ways, he's outgrown the House, and he has seen an opportunity to take his fight for democracy, but also against extremists, against this toxic tribalism, onto a national scale, onto a national level. And I'll say it's hard to do both when you're currently serving and you're representing 700,000 constituents in Northern Illinois down to the Indiana border, and doing that while also taking on what is the cancer of the GOP. It's hard to do. It's hard to do both. And I think for him, it's time for him to focus his efforts on that. And so he is focusing his efforts on Country First. It's grown exponentially in the last year since we launched. And, I'm excited to see what he does with it and where it goes from where it currently is, truthfully. But part of that is taking on these extremists in the party, but also who are running down ballots. So not just for congressional seats, but state legislatures, state secretary of state. We're looking at several races through, kind of people who showed up for January 6th, right? Those people are running. They're running for state house seats. So we have to get people involved in the primary. The percentage of people who vote in a primary is very small. And so we're looking to change that.
Something you said a moment ago made me happy. Honestly, you were describing, for one, I've done local radio, but then more importantly, you identified the fact that you were speaking to the district that Representative Kinzinger serves, and you spoke about what messaging makes sense. Where do you see? Tell me about your district. Honestly, I just want to hear more of how does a representative put that more to the forefront, because it seems like, and it's not, I'll put social media to the side for a moment, but it seems like for those who serve a term, which is 2 years or 6 in the Senate, that there's a lot of conversation of the national discourse, but not so much as a representative of a particular district. So for example, I live in Easton, Pennsylvania. Susan Wild, is our representative. And obviously as a voter, that's the discourse I need to have with her. It's like what matters in the Lehigh Valley, where I live. But for your team, what does that local interaction look like? And is there a challenge with trying to maintain that focus locally and not get into what often feels like a national discourse that is very much performative, and it's not based on the reality of serving 2 years and focusing on your district first?
Absolutely. So in my job, as communications, I'm deputy chief of staff, but my main focus for the congressman has been communications. And he has a national profile, which again, over the last 7 years, we've built up and has certainly changed how we do media. But the big focus we have always had was, how do we tie things back to the district? The 16th district as it currently stands, which will change, but as it currently stands, goes from Rockford all the way up to the Wisconsin border down to the Indiana border. So it's a very large district. Main focus is there: agriculture, manufacturing, and nuclear energy. So we have 4 nuclear generating stations, which is the most of any district in the country. And so tying in energy, which again, the congressman serves on House Foreign Affairs and energy and commerce, but we tie in a lot of for example, for years, we've been talking about Russia's stranglehold on oil and energy in Europe. So talking about that and tying it back to the district, because they understand the importance of having energy independence. So we do find ways constantly of how to talk with our constituents about what's happening both on the national and at the local level, and try to make those connections for them, why it matters to them, explaining to them why this matters to their individual communities, to their schools. So we do absolutely make that a focus of ours, for sure.
Maura, before we let you go, and can't thank you enough for coming on the pod. I want to read something that I loved on your LinkedIn bio. So sorry to make you blush for a second, but it says here that Maura is an expert on communication strategy and messaging. We're going to put that. We're going to put that to the test.
Bio. You'll say put it all out on Front Street. My
That's
goodness.
right. And well, she puts it out on Front Street. It's out in the public. Maura, what, in your opinion, should the Republicans that are in the mold of Representative Adam Kinzinger, what should they be doing from a messaging standpoint for the upcoming midterms? The ones that are moderate leaning, that want to distance themselves from the extreme of the party, what should they be doing from a messaging standpoint to get people on board to vote R in the midterms?
Focus on their constituents. Remind them why it is that they are running and to serve them. Truthfully, that's how you're going to win every election. I know it's easier and it's more newsworthy to talk about whatever else is going on, but a big part of it is not being so reactive to everything. If we have to respond to everything that's happening on Twitter, you're going to lose. It's just not, you're never going to be able to keep up. You're never going to be able to make everyone happy. That's one thing. Just remember that. But telling and speaking directly to your constituents, engaging with them so that they remember why did they voted for you in the first place, or why they would want to vote for you this time. I think that's the biggest part of it. Staying away from, honestly, the drama is probably going to help them in the long run.
Well said. Maura Gillespie, Deputy Chief of Staff for Representative Adam Kinzinger. You can check out also countryfirst.com that we were talking about earlier on in the interview, country1st.com.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Maura, for hopping on the podcast. Continued success to you and yours. Stay safe. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.